I would love to do an experiment here. But before I read Nietzsche himself, I encountered him everywhere. And so I made a collection of different readings of Nietzsche and takes on him that I've encountered, and even before I read him, influenced my thinking about him. And so I'd love to just share these with you, and I think some of them might be quite agreeable. A lot of them are criticisms. And yeah, we could just, whatever comes to mind in terms of a response. Maybe
Please.
I'll read it, and then afterwards I'll tell you who it's from after if
Okay.
okay. So here we go. Quote, on reading him, we perceive that something of his brilliance is due to exaggeration, to an interesting but at last neurotic egotism, to an overly facile inversion of every accepted notion, the ridicule of every virtue, the praise of every vice. He takes, we discover, a sophomore's delight in shocking. We conclude that it is easy to be interesting when one has no prejudices in favor of morality. These dogmatic assertions, these unmodified generalizations, these prophetic repetitions, these contradictions of others, not more than of himself, reveal a mind that has lost its balance and hovers on the edge of madness. Nietzsche does not prove, he announces and reveals. He wins us with his imagination rather than with his logic. He offers us not a philosophy merely, nor yet only a poem, but a new faith, a new hope, a new religion.
Hmm. That's pretty good. Um, I'm broadly in agreement with this. I think that I would question the pathologization theory there, where it's everything is reducible to the whims of a madman, and because you see, I think that Nietzsche's more serious than he's not reducible to this idea of um, adolescent play. Like Nietzsche may attract an adolescent spirit in us, and he actually writes a lot about discovering the inner child. Um, but for me, he's far too influential to reduce him to that.
Yeah.
Um, but that's a pretty good
Yeah.
one. Who was it?
That's Will Durant, The Story of Philosophy.
Pretty honest, pretty
Yeah, I like
good.
that one a lot. I like that one as well. Okay. Here's another one. This one I didn't like so much. Let's see what you think. Describing the way in which the German, I guess, government, used Nietzsche. So 150,000 copies of Zarathustra were printed in a special pocket edition for German soldiers in the First World War. And our author continues, one wonders what on earth they used them for, just as one wonders what Nietzsche, who was so hostile to pan-German militarism, would have made of this development. And then he gives some quotes from Nietzsche's writings about, anti-militarism. What do you think of that reading of Nietzsche?
Well, it goes back to situating. I mean, there's a very famous quote of Nietzsche from the Antichrist called "Whispers in the Ear of Conservatives," and this aphorism has been debated. Was Nietzsche to the left or to the right of the conservatives? And what he's talking about is how the conservatives can overcome decadence. And there's been multiple readings of this particular aphorism. And at heart, where I fall on it is that Nietzsche's actually advocating that conservatives, mainly Bismarck, are too cowardly to truly go all the way in on militarism, right? And to truly embrace the coming age of great politics, which is what? Which is the great age of colonial conquest, right? And so this notion of the blonde beast and the kind of encouragement to the ruling class to escape their uh, weakness is an implicit endorsement of militarism. Um, if in some other valences Nietzsche can be read to um, not endorse militarism, I would have to see those to assess them in
Yeah.
context.
Yeah.
But overall, um, it's definitely fair to say that Nietzsche is in his notion of great politics is an implicit uh, endorsement of the imperial age. That's without question.
Yeah. So that's from the biography of Nietzsche, I Am Dynamite by Sue Prideaux. And that
Yep.
had a big influence on my thinking. And people would ask me, like, what do you think of Nietzsche? And do you think and I said I would just point, look, Sue Prideaux, she wrote this biography and it convinced me and made me think that he wasn't. But as I encountered him more, I felt like it actually doesn't feel so honest, you know? And I struggle with that.
Right. That's right. That's right. It's a it's a huge, huge debate within the Nietzschean community. Again, you know, it goes back to the passionate attachments that he brings out in his readers, and also to the fact that in Nietzschean scholarship, let's keep in mind, he has kept professors busy for the last 120 years.
Mhm.
Let's take the American Nietzschean industry, for example, in academia. Most of them will say, I am a specialist on the early, middle, or late Nietzsche. That just shows they don't usually say I'm a specialist on all of Nietzsche. Right? That shows the depth of the spectrum of Nietzscheanism, right? And how particular and granular the scholar experts get in him. And so a lot of these things are upsetting for anybody to learn of these agendas, you know, but we have to bring out the sources and compare them.
Yeah. I like the following quote a lot. It's talking about Nietzsche's embrace of the, let's say, amoral or possibly immoral, and sort of what that means within his thinking. So
Hmm.
Nietzsche considered the riotous reclamation of evil something of a necessary pit stop on the way to dancing with cosmic forces, which have no truck with normative, especially religious conceptions of morality. In other words, embracing cruelty is a step, a sort of hazing or threshold on the path to moving beyond cruelty, a space valorized by Artaud as more elemental, more animal, more natural realm than that of the civilized world. And we'll stop there.
Mm, yes, that's very, very helpful. What is I mean, part of this is that if we read Nietzsche detethered from his time as a kind of free floating thinker, um, all of the idea of exertion of animal cruelty and the annihilation of the failed and the weak can kind of be glossed over because all of that's kind of come and gone, right? But again, that's not how the right will read him, right? So you end up in a kind of myopic silo on the left if you discard that agenda. And it's a different Nietzsche than the right. Like we talked about before, it's like night and day. So you always have to keep that at the center, just as a purely ethical point. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense why he repeats that. And I think, you know, the basic idea of why he repeats the homage and the encouragement of cruelty is precisely because of his reading of the consequences of the death of God and the creation and the instantiation that he's trying to build about a new form of ethics and morality in our world. Um, so it's troubling because our world is one where cruelty exists. And so we can't, um, how do we confront cruelty? Nietzsche's giving us a highly militant and robust and radical way to confront it. But I'm not compelled by that myself.
Yeah. That's from Maggie Nelson. Her book is The Art of Cruelty. And I'll just say that personally, I thought this was a wonderful, the book itself, her book is a wonderful exploration of the aesthetic of like violence and art and like the Dionysian kind of impulse, which Nietzsche, of course, wrote a lot about, but as that plays out in like the world of art. Um,
I see.
yeah. Uh,
Yes,
should we go to the next one here?
please.
Okay. So this is talking about incels, actually. This is talking about like the online right-wing communities. So their own anxiety and anger about their low-ranking status in their hierarchy is precisely what has produced their hardline rhetoric about asserting hierarchy in the world politically when it comes to women and non-whites. The pain of relentless rejection has festered in these forums and allowed them to be the masters of the cruel, natural hierarchies that bring them so much humiliation. The psychological compensation is nothing new, right? She had mentioned earlier that we're talking about people who also talk a lot about Nietzsche. They love Nietzsche. So Nietzsche's fetish for physical male strength, hierarchy, and the exertion of will, which his Nazi followers were attracted to in his writing, contrasted in a similarly pathetic way to the reality of his physical state: myopia, nervous prostration, chronic ill health, digestive disorders, and of course, the bitter
Mm.
rejection of women.
I like it. I mean, part of what I like about it is that um, one of the points I argue in my book is that Nietzsche, at the end of the day, because he is such a Manichaean thinker in social matters, where he argues that society must embrace an idea of an ascending and a descending line of humanity. And you, he says, I only write for those whose lives have turned out well. Okay. You, the reader, must try your darndest to be on the ascent. Okay. And so that creates a kind of sadomasochistic zero sum game logic in people's minds. And I think that that's a fiction, right? And I think that if you literalize that, if you internalize that, it's no shock that you will get things like inceldom, right? And so the incel needs to be shaken up and shown of those fictions. But you see, the Nietzschean philosophy is almost trying to harden that as a nonfiction. That's a danger. And this is a danger that Peter Sloterdijk identifies with fascism. He calls fascism a movement of losers who want to um, transvalue the values to insert themselves as winners, right? So they take the fiction and they politically reorganize it. I think in politics we have to shatter that completely. But I'm not sure that Nietzsche wanted to shatter that. I think he wanted to harden it.
Yeah. So that's Angela Nagel, who wrote a short little book about the online right and the culture
Yep.
wars and Trump. Her book is
Yes.
called Kill All Normies.
Yes.
And so Nietzsche plays a role in that book because of his role in that culture.
Absolutely.
Okay, I love this one. This is from someone who really doesn't like Nietzsche at all. Is really upset at him. All right. So key to Nietzsche's popularity with atheistic amoralists is his materialistic mysticism, a sleight of hand that makes the world's meaninglessness into something meaningful and refashions fate into freedom before our eyes. He duped himself into thinking that it was possible to create values, but how these values would be created and what they would be, he could not say. After demolishing the life-rejecting faith of the crucified, Nietzsche handed down his own commandments through the Antichrist-like Messiah Zarathustra, who was groomed to take over Christianity's administration of the Western world and to keep it afloat with counterfeit funds, carrying around a sackload of unrealities from here to the eternal return. Perhaps no one has ever been as normal, in quotation marks, as Nietzsche.
Wow. Perhaps no one has been as normal as Nietzsche. I'm not sure what the meaning of that phrase
He
is.
doesn't like normal. He thinks that normal people are have like the sunny predisposition who are blindly walking through life and like the religious. It's like the herd mentality. He's accusing Nietzsche of being a part of the herd.
Hmm. Part of this is that because he's so elusive,
Hmm.
it's a strategy of victory, right? So if Nietzsche invites his readers to treat him as an enemy, he's also creating a game of winning and losing. And so I'm not sure that that perspective will be as successful in taking Nietzsche down. Because again, I'm always concerned with any effort to sort of uh, cast off Nietzsche as not incredibly brilliant, you know, or in this case to kind of cloud the stakes of his success. So I read Nietzsche as a great victor, right? And I think that anyone that wants to change the world has to take the time to really kind of honor his victory, you know?
Yeah.
But who was that? That was a
That's
good one.
Thomas Lagotti. He wrote a book called The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, which is a book of antinatalism or pessimism, basically saying that life is not worth living and that procreation is morally problematic. And so he goes through the philosophers of pessimism, basically, and he's very upset that Nietzsche sounds so pessimistic, has so much reason to be pessimistic, but like out of nowhere says, amor fati, we love our fate and things like that. So that's what he's
Oh
wrestling
wow.
with.
Okay. That's a little idiosyncratic for me, but
Okay.
interesting.
Okay. Last one is very short. This one is it's about if someone wanted me to sum up Nietzsche in just one sentence, I would recommend this sentence here. Um, This is actually okay. So yeah, it's an adaptation of something Simone de Beauvoir wrote about Marquis de Sade. So she wrote this again about Marquis de Sade, but I think it applies to Nietzsche. So she wrote that Rousseau held that nature is good, let us follow her. Thomas Hobbes that nature is evil, let us not follow her. And Nietzsche that nature is evil, let us follow her.
Oh my gosh. Uh, okay, so you swapped out the Marquis
I
de Sade for
saw for
Nietzsche
Nietzsche.
then.
She wrote that about Sade.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I see, I see, I see. Well, you see, I actually don't think that Nietzsche and the Marquis de Sade um are that comparable, because the Marquis de Sade, in a certain way, what he's trying to reverse in the um sort of Republican tradition of the social contract, right, is a type of social contract based on a kind of unlimited and unlawful hedonism and sexual experimentation and so on. Um, I really don't think that Nietzsche's anti-moralism and anti-normative proclivities were after the same objective at all, actually. I actually read Nietzsche more as a preserver. That's why that goes back to the Bonapartism piece. So I'm not sure that Nietzsche is radical like that. I
Hmm.
read Nietzsche more because, you see, Nietzsche's more of a political thinker. He's on the spectrum of politics. The Marquis de Sade is a total aberration from the spectrum in some sense. That's why he's so attractive to like avant-garde, and it's like he's so outside. Nietzsche's on the inside of politics, actually. Nietzsche latches onto different political expressions, and Marquis de Sade does not.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure that I would follow, but nonetheless, it's interesting.
How about the social Darwinism element of Nietzsche? Do you think that's appropriate?
Well, yes, I mean, Nietzsche was an early advocate of eugenics, and a lot of his right-wing followers today are obsessed with like um, physiological rank, IQ, these kind of vulgar social Darwinist bases of rethinking inequality and stuff like that. Um, so, yes, I think, yeah, Nietzsche can be thought of along those lines, but only to an extent, I would say.